Hello, it's Moira here from Daisy Knots and welcome to week 1 of the Mosaic Sampler Cal. And I'm so happy that you're able to join me in this crochet along. Each week you're going to get 2 charts, one in colour, which is the colourway that I crocheted my Afghan in, and one in blacks and greys, in which you can change to your colourway if you wish. So the charts, we have a key which tells us how to create our last border stitch and our first border stitch. And these 2 special stitches are done on every row. Please take note the chart and videos are written in UK crochet terms. The Afghan uses 7 colours and these are coded A to G. You should have already done row 1 in the cast on and the first row, and you should also have some sort of way to tell if you've got 182 stitches there. You can see I've got lots of markers. So looking at row 2, we are going to be using colour E, which in my case is dark brown, and with a 5mm hook. At the beginning of each row we do a special border stitch. It's called the first border stitch, and I'm going to demonstrate how to do this now. So we need to find that first stitch that we're going to go through, and it's that funny stitch that's slightly curved at the end. Insert your hook into both the front and back loops. Join colour E by pulling through both loops, and now we're going to work a chain stitch. Once you've completed your chain stitch, you then are going to go back through both loops again in exactly the same stitch and work a double crochet. On that second row that we're away to do, each of the squares denotes a double crochet stitch into the back loop only. They're all little squares and it all means double crochet into the back loop only. Working a double crochet stitch into the back loop is one of the 2 stitches that make up our mosaic crochet pattern. On this second row, it's really important that we finish it with 180 stitches plus our 2 stitches, one for our first border stitch and one for our last border stitch. I'm going to count here to see how many I've done. So there's the first border stitch. I'm not going to count that. So there is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And I've come to a stitch marker from the row below. I'm going to take that out. I don't replace my stitch markers once I've removed them in this row because I'm confident that I have 180 stitches plus that 2 special stitches, the first border stitch and the last border stitch. But please do use stitch markers if you feel more confident with them. I've now come to the end of the row, so I'm just going to finish that last couple of stitches, and then I'm ready to do that last border stitch, again a special stitch. The last border stitch, you go through the front and back loops of this stitch, again like the same we did the first stitch, the front and back loop of that last stitch, do a double crochet and then work 1 chain stitch, and then we're ready to snip off. We snip our yarn at the end of every row as we are changing colours each row, but not only are we changing colours, we always work from the right to the left at the beginning of each row. So we're going all the way back to the right hand side of our work, and we always work with the front of our work facing. Now completed row 1 and 2, so I'm going to tick them off, and we are now ready to start row 3, which in my case colour A is back to my white colour. We can see in this row we've got an X in our box this time, not just a blank box, and the X means treble crochet into the front loop 2 rows below. However, before we get to the treble crochet, we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 double crochet stitches into the back loop before we do that drop treble into the front loop. Quick reminder of how to do that first border stitch through both front and back loops. So through both front and back loops, and pick up our new colour of yarn. Pull our colour A yarn through and fix it with our chain stitch, and then back through both front and back loops of the same stitch again and work our double crochet. And I said it was going to be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. 7 double crochets into the back loop only. Counting my stitches, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So I'm now ready to do that drop treble. As it's a treble, I wrap my yarn around my hook, and it's this next stitch but the one below that I'm going into. So you can see here, here's the next stitch, and it's the one below that I'm actually inserting my hook into. Always insert your hook from the bottom up. Pull the yarn through and then complete your treble as normal. The drop treble stitch is instead of the stitch on row 2. You worked into row 1, and row 2 should actually have a blank stitch behind it. It's really important you do not go into this stitch. The next stitch you go into is the one next to this stitch. We now have got 1, 2, 3, 4 stitches to finish this pattern, because this is a section of the pattern that we repeat. There's 12 stitches altogether, and we just keep repeating this 12 stitches until we get to the end section. I'm going to work my next 4 stitches, and then that takes me to the solid line in my pattern. Then remember the repeat, so it was 7, so that's 11 stitches in all I've got to work before I do my next drop treble stitch. I always count my stitches in this row because it's quite important. So you can see here I'm counting, and yes, I have 11 stitches, so I can do the next drop treble. So remember, wrap around the yarn, identify the next stitch, then the one below, and we're inserting our hook from the bottom up. Hook inserted upwards, finish the treble, and that's our second drop treble completed. Keep repeating these 12 stitches until you get to the last section, and then you always count your stitches at the end. I'm ready to do the last drop treble, which is what I'm doing here, and then I'm going to make sure that my stitch count here matches the end stitch count. So there should be 4 stitches, 1, 2, 3, 4, and that's perfect for the last border stitch as well. I've completed my 4 stitches. I'm now ready to do that last border stitch, and a recap is through both front and back loops, complete the double crochet, and then 1 chain stitch to finish. We've snipped off colour A and gone back to the right side of our work and marked off row 3. And row 4 is 2 double crochet stitches into the back loop before we get to that drop treble, and then 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 double crochets into the back loop. We're back on colour E, and I'm going to carry on and complete this row, row 4, and I'll come back and let you see what it looks like at the end. I've completed row 4, and you can see what the pattern looks like at the end of row 4. On to row 5 with our first colour A again, our main colour. And this time we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 double crochets into our back loop before we do our drop treble. You can start to see the pattern emerging. We're not immediately above the drop treble from row 2. We actually are one off to the side, which gives us the diagonal that's going up. Now we know that we've got that pattern that's got the diagonal, we can actually stop counting if you want, because you know that it's going to be just one stitch to the left of the white drop treble you did previously. Row 5 can now be ticked off, and now on to row 6, and on to row 6, where we've got 1, 2, 3 stitches before we drop our treble. And the same on this row as in the previous row, we've got a diagonal pattern following up, but this time it's not following the white stitching, it's following the dark coloured, the brown stitching in my case. So here we are at the end of row 6, and you can clearly see the pattern now. That diagonal pattern is starting to form. Here we go, this is what row 7 looks like when it's completed, and we can clearly see those 3 steps of our colour A going up, and now we're ready to start on colour B, which is blue in my case. It doesn't matter that the colour of our yarn is different, we're still doing a drop treble, and that means still down 2 rows below. So this time, though we're using colour blue, we're going into the brown stitch, and that gives us that drop treble into the stitch 2 rows below. And fast forward quite a lot of crocheting. This is what your completed pattern 1 should look like. You can see all the different diagonals of the cream and the colour blending up into each other. We've now completed pattern 1, and I hope you're having fun with the pattern, and I will see you back next week for pattern 2.